Hello everyone and welcome to Chapter 9 Gas Exchange. This is the shortest chapter in AS ever and we're going to finish it in one video. Now, it's even shorter now that is in the new syllabus. That's because the smoking component that used to be in this chapter is now removed. So if you see any smoking related questions in your past year papers, please be sure to just ignore them because it's no longer in the syllabus anymore. Yay! But what's remaining in the syllabus really is the structure and function of the airway. So we have lungs, trachea, bronchi, bronchioles, alveoli here, which is our main structures. And we need to know all its components as well and what they function as. We also have to identify it in micrographs and draw plan diagrams. So in this chapter, you'll see a lot of images, a lot of micrographs, so that we can train our eyes to identify those separate tissues. So let's start off with just a little introduction, a little overview of what the airway looks like. So there's the upper respiratory tract, which consists of the nasal cavity, so our nose, and the cavity above it, the pharynx and the larynx. The pharynx is kind of connected to our oral cavity as well, which is our mouth. Then there's the lower respiratory tract, which is really our main focus here. The trachea, this consists of the trachea, the primary bronchi, and then bronchioles, and then goes down to alveoli. This is a clearer picture of what's going on, more labeled, I suppose. The trachea, bronchus, which branches out into the bronchiole, which then branches out into this alveoli again. Now, I just want to draw your attention to the bronchioles for a moment. The bronchiole actually has two types. One is the terminal bronchioles. So the bronchus or bronchi will branch out into bronchioles first, or terminal bronchioles, and then terminal bronchioles further branch out into respiratory bronchioles, which then is connected to the alveoli. I also would like to draw your attention now to the structures surrounding the lungs. So as you know, our lungs is protected by our rib cage. So the ribs are shown here, and between those ribs there are intercostal muscles. And right below our lungs there is a diaphragm that will move up and down as you inhale and exhale. So yeah, these are the general structures of the lungs and the airway. We are gonna bring our focus, in this chapter into these four main structures in your lungs. Okay, the trachea, the bronchi, the bronchioles, and the alveoli. And we're gonna look at the tissue layers within each and every single one of them and identify the structures, the components that are in them. So let's start off with trachea. Now this is a very oversimplified diagram, okay, but it does tell us some useful information of where things are. So let's start from inside out, right? So we have the lumen on the most inside, right? This is the lumen, and then the first layer, the inmost layer here, is the ciliated epithelium. And you can see within the ciliated epithelium there are goblet cells, and we'll talk about them later, but just know these goblet cells are within that layer. Now, right after the layer, and I guess it's not really shown here, is where the mucous glands kind of hang out at, and there's also elastic fibers. So elastic fibers and mucous glands, they actually kind of make up the submucosal layer. And I don't think it's very apparent here, but it will be very apparent in our next slide. Now, so that's the ciliated epithelium with goblet cells, then the submucosal layer, and then you reach this layer called the hyaline cartilage tissue, right? This is a C-shaped ring in the trachea and a very distinctive feature of the trachea. You see the C-shaped ring, you know for sure it's trachea. Last but not least, we have our smooth muscle layer surrounding outside, and also in between these ends of the C-shaped ring. So again, ciliated epithelial layer, then the submucosal layer, and then the hyaline cartilage layer, and then the smooth muscle layer. Okay, so this is obviously an oversimplified diagram. Let's look at this, right, in real life. What does it look like under the microscope? So this is what it looks like under a microscope. This is quite zoomed in. The lumen is on the right side here. So this is the inmost layer. This is again the ciliated epithelium. You can see how the elastic membrane is below it. It's not very visible, not very apparent, but it's kind of there. You can see it more obviously here. But this whole region here is really called the submucosal layer or submucosa. So that's number one. This is number two. Third layer, that's the hyaline cartilage. And even though you don't see the C shape here because it's so zoomed in, you can see it's definitely there. You can see that the hyaline cartilage layer is also vastly different from the other layers. It has these like polka dot appearance. The cells are kind of white, and then surrounding those cells are like this pink, purplish kind of stain, which is quite common for the hyaline cartilage to have. So yeah, very interesting appearance. We'll see a closer look of this later. Now, obviously, in a micrograph, you need to slice very thin slices of the trachea of an animal usually and put them on a slide. So sometimes you would see some connective tissue, and this is not something you need to be concerned with, but just so you know, it's made up of some fat. It could be fat layers, it could be some collagen, it could be some stringy other tissue. Not important, just ignore. All right, so you can't identify them either, so that's okay. But what you can identify definitely is the smooth muscle layer. Right on the outside, it's usually reddish, and you can see the nucleus are all elongated like this. And it seems to have layers, many layers condensed into one. It looks like a crepe cake sometimes, all right? And that would be smooth muscle. And as you can see here, this looks vastly different from hyaline cartilage. Long, elongated cells. These ones are like polka dotty in appearance. So yeah, you should be able to differentiate those two and identify those two almost immediately. Now let's zoom out a little bit, and this is what it looks like. So just now was a zoom in version. This is a zoom out version. And I just wanted to let you know again that, hey, even though we didn't see the C shape just now, when you zoom out, you definitely can see the C shape cutting. And this is how you tell it's a trachea, for sure. And you can see the hyaline cartilage ring here. Okay, again, it's like polka dotty in appearance. It's quite chunky. It's usually stained a little bit purplish in color. Okay, you can see the layer here again, here, and here. And it's beautiful, honestly. I don't know what you think about it, but I think it's beautiful. All right, so this is the trachea. Let's take a closer look and kind of label them as we go along as well. And maybe you can connect in your head what it looks like, zoom out and zoom in. So again, let's look at the different layers. We have the lumen in the middle, obviously. Number one layer, the most innermost would be ciliated epithelium, labeled 2 here. The second layer right under it is submucosal layer, which would have these big like holes, but they're not really holes, they're not empty, they're actually mucous glands. Okay, and there is elastic tissue, elastic fiber somewhere in there as well. So yeah, you can see it labeled here at number 6. And elastic fibers are not labeled here because it's not very visible. That's okay. That's okay. Just see it all as one submucosal layer. So that's ciliated epithelium, submucosal layer. Then we have our hyaline cartilage layer, which is our third layer right here. And as you can see again, polka dotty in appearance. Okay, not quite darkly stained here, but polka dot, a bit purplish. And you can see here that it's kind of cute. Also polka dotty appearance, a lot of white cells in a sea of pink purplish color. And last but not least, we have our smooth muscles layer on the outside, and you can see how they are layered and the nucleus is elongated here in number 5. And you can also see the smooth muscle layer right here, where it's also like a layer cake, like a crepe cake, right? Many layers, elongated nucleus. So yeah, that's the trachea. Now that we know its structure, let's look at its function and like its ultrastructure. Sorry, let's look at the ultrastructure first. Then we look at the function. So this is what the ciliated epithelial layer looks like. So this is the ciliated epithelium layer, all right? And it has this appearance right here. Okay, so it's not really like a nice neat layer. It's like the small cells and big cells, but these cells here have cilia, and also within the layer, remember I said just now that there are goblet cells within it, and this is what goblet cells look like. It does look like a goblet, right? Like a cup, a wine glass maybe. And if you would draw a goblet cell, it would look something like this. Okay, now what features it has is that it has a lot of Golgi and ER, and that's because goblet cells' main function is to produce mucus, and mucus is made up of this glycoprotein called mucin. So mucin, glycoprotein. And to make glycoprotein, right, you need a lot of protein. So you make the protein in ribosomes and the ER, and you need to modify that protein as well in the Golgi. And then the Golgi will need to package it into secretory vesicles, which you can see here, and secrete that mucin out of the cell in order to make mucus. So that's a whole chapter 1 throwback there, and you already learned the process in chapter 1. So go back and revise that. It's applicable here. Now that's the ciliated epithelium layer. That's the first layer. How the submucosal layer? And what does the mucous glands look like? So submucosal here, some elastic fibers on top visible in this diagram somehow. Mucous glands, well, they kind of have this kind of structure. So even though it doesn't look like it's connected here, that's because it's just a slice of the trachea. In real life, it's actually connected to the ciliated epithelial layer. So we can see here how the mucous glands have like many, like it's wavy. The gland is kind of wavy, and there's like this empty space right here, which is not empty. They are filled with mucus, and that kind of gets secreted out and out of the submucosal layer to the ciliated epithelial layer and form the mucus as well that covers the cilia. So yeah, that is the ciliated epithelial layer, goblet cells within them, and the mucous glands in the submucosal layer. Now let's take a closer look at the hyaline cartilage. You can see these cells here, and these cells are actually called chondrocytes. This is a little bit off syllabus, but that's what they're called. And they kind of come usually in pairs. You can look at this pair here, there's this pair and this pair here, and they're quite large, so they do give this polka dotty type of appearance. So that's hyaline cartilage, quite beautiful. And then don't care about the rest, it's just connective tissue. We look at D here. D here is smooth muscle, and this is like a zoom in version of what's going on. You can see here how the nucleus is elongated, and the cells are elongated as well, and they pack together quite closely, forming these layers. And again, I think it's really quite beautiful. Okay, so we learned of all the layers now. What in the world do they do? Let's look at the typed out version here. We know that goblet cells and mucous glands, they exist in different layers, but both of them produce mucus, which is made out of a glycoprotein called mucin, and mucus actually functions to trap pathogens and dust, etc., so you don't breathe it in. Yeah, and this mucus kind of coats the cilia. Now what the cilia does is that it sweeps it rhythmically, so it's actually sweeping it constantly upwards from your trachea to the back of your throat and the pharynx away from the lungs, and actually sweeps it into your oral cavity so that you can swallow it, goes into your digestive tract so that the pathogens would be killed in your digestive system. Yay! So yeah, you actually kind of eat your own mucus naturally, but it doesn't come out of you, it just goes to the back of throat and then into your digestive system. So yeah, that is what the function of goblet cells, mucous glands, and cilia. And it's really important. It's a protective function. Now, what about the rest? Right, so the cartilage, which is our next layer, it keeps the airway open. Hyaline cartilage is really like a soft bone. It has some flexibility, but it also has a lot of structural support. And you have many rings here going down. And yeah, it prevents the airway from collapsing during breathing because there are so many changes in air pressure as you breathe in and out. Also, it allows for low air resistance because it continuously keeps your airway open. Now, what about elastic fibers, which is found in submucosal layer and smooth muscle? What are they for? Now, when we talk about elastic fibers and smooth muscles, we must be very careful with the terminology. Just like elastic fibers and smooth muscles when we talk about blood vessels. Same thing here, elastic fibers can stretch and recoil. During inspiration, when we inhale, right? When you inhale, it stretches, and when you exhale, it recoils. When it stretches, it really increases surface area, and when it recoils, it expels air. And actually, this is only applicable in the alveoli, not so much in the trachea. And that's because in the trachea, there's a C-shaped cartilage, which is quite rigid, right? So you don't expect a lot of leeway in movement there, but there will be more in the alveoli. Now, how about the smooth muscle? Smooth muscle relax and contracts as muscles do, and this play a part in widening the airway. So when it relaxes, the airway widens, allowing a higher volume of air to flow through. And when it contracts, the airway constricts, which lowers the volume of air that can able to flow to go through. And I guess this is a contraction of smooth muscles occurs very often in as an inflammation response, right? A response to infection, or in cases like asthma. You can see here how in asthma there is a constricted kind of airway here, right? And asthma attack would cause an even more constricted airway, and this would cause a wheezing sound that is characteristic in people with asthma. So it's like whistling because there is just such a small hole for air to pass through. Now you can realize here also, I just want to note here also that this is not very apparent in the trachea. So in the trachea, again, there's a C-shaped cartilage ring, which is quite rigid. However, in other parts where there is smooth muscles, such as the bronchi or bronchus, oops, misspelled that, bronchi, right? These are all bronchi here. We can see how it can affect breathing in a severe manner. So yeah, that is elastic fibers and smooth muscles. Both of them, again, not very apparent and function in the trachea, but you will see it more in other parts of the lungs. Okay, like the bronchus. So we have finished the trachea. It branches out into bronchus, two primary ones and then smaller bronchi. Now, what is up with bronchus? Now, similarly to trachea, it has quite a similar layer, except that the hyaline cartilage is not C-shaped, it's in the form of plates. Okay, let's label the different layers again. So we start from the inside, there's the lumen, which is the hole. And then there's a ciliated epithelium, which is the first layer. Then we have the submucosal layer with the mucous glands. All right. And then, and then we have the hyaline cartilage plates together with the smooth muscle, which here it's drawn, just at the same layer as those hyaline cartilage plates. Again, this is an overly simplified diagram. A more accurate diagram looks like this. So this is the bronchus, bronchi, which is plural. And you can see how it's so distinctively different from the trachea, mainly because of the cartilage plates. And cartilage plates are all labeled using these little black arrows here. Now, how do you see the cartilage plates? First of all, it looks very different from its surrounding tissue, and also it has this polka dotty appearance, and also it's often like slightly different in color, as you can see here and here. Now, very often, this kind of images, like trachea and all the other ones involved, they're all in black and white. So it might look a little bit like this. But as you can see, it's still possible to point out where those cartilage plates are and identify that it is indeed a bronchus. So yeah. Now, all the functions of the bronchus and all the different layers are pretty much the same, and the functions are pretty much the same as trachea. So I won't be repeating those functions of each component again. Yeah? All right. Let's move on to bronchiole. Now, bronchiole has even lesser structure. It definitely does not have cartilage, as you can tell here. It does definitely have a ciliated epithelial layer. However, only very few are ciliated. Most of them are squamous epithelium. Squamous is the opposite of ciliated epithelial cells. Okay, so squamous epithelial cells do not have cilia. Now, right after that, we have there's no submucosal layer, no goblet cell here, no mucous glands here, just elastic fiber layer and nothing else, right? No cartilage, no mucus producing cells, very little cilia. Now, how about smooth muscles? Now, smooth muscles are present nearer the bronchus, so terminal bronchioles do have them. However, respiratory bronchioles, which are further from the bronchus, closer to alveoli, they do not have smooth muscle and have even lesser cilia. Oops, yeah, slight jump. They have even lesser cilia, sometimes even none. None. No cilia nearing when it's very close to the alveolus. Yep. So that's the bronchiole. Let's look at it in real life. Again, this is an overly simplified diagram. In real life, it really looks more like this and this. It kind of looks like a octopus in the middle of there. Okay, some students have told me that it looks like a butthole. Okay, I admit it does kind of look like that. And that's because it doesn't have cartilage, right? Therefore, the structure is like more irregular, and like the inside, the epithelial layer seems to have all these waves. They are also very close to alveoli, so that might be a telltale sign that it's a bronchiole. We can see how close it is to alveoli around it here. So it's like alveoli is like a web-like kind of thing. So that would tell you it's a bronchiole. Folded epithelium, as I told you, and smooth muscle would be kind of there. And this folded epithelium will become more apparent if the smooth muscle is contracting. Again, smooth muscles are present in terminal bronchioles only, not like respiratory bronchioles. You mostly see terminal bronchioles in your exams. So something like this or something like this. Okay, we can see here also blood vessels surrounding it, and you can see the size of it is kind of similar, and that's also a telltale sign that it is a bronchiole. So yeah, bronchioles again do not have cartilage, close to alveoli, folded epithelium, looks like a butthole. Great, great. Didn't think I would use that in a video, but here we go. Now, what about alveoli? Well, alveoli, we kind of saw the image there just now that is like a net-like kind of structure, and you can see it again here. It's pretty simple. It only has a simple squamous epithelium. It does not have cilia, and it is the site of gaseous exchange. Only alveoli is the site of gaseous exchange. And that's because it's very close to capillaries. So alveoli is one cell thick. Okay, and as you can see here, there's the alveolar duct, and then there is the alveolar space or the alveolar sac. Sometimes they call it that. And it's one cell thick. And you can see this capillary nearby is also one cell thick, also has squamous epithelium, but it's carrying red blood cells. So yeah, this makes it pretty efficient for gas exchange. What else? What else? So let's list it. Okay, number one, I just mentioned is one cell thick, and this makes the diffusion distance much shorter between air and blood, efficient gas exchange. Number two, collectively, because of its large surface area, this makes diffusion go at a higher rate as well. So large surface area, also really good for gas exchange. Number three, there's a lot of elastic fibers that we can't mention just now. They're pretty much made out of squamous epithelium and elastic fibers. And what elastic fibers for? We kind of covered this just now as well, but elastic fibers can stretch and recoil. And when it stretches, it increases the surface area. When it recoils, it expels the air. And obviously, this increasing in surface area happens when there's inhalation or inspiration. And when elastic fibers expel air, this is during exhalation. And this really prevents also bursting of the alveoli because it allows some stretch, right? And it can recoil. So yeah, it won't burst. It's a bit elastic there. So that is the third point. The fourth point is that it's surrounded by a network of capillaries. And this is really important for the diffusion gradient. Now, this diffusion gradient coupled with good ventilation and good circulation of blood ensures that there is rapid gas exchange. Now, how so? What's the diffusion gradient here? Okay, so let's look at this labels of high, low, partial pressure here. So this is blood that's deoxygenated, right? This is coming in from the heart. Okay, and this deoxygenated blood here would have low partial pressure of oxygen, so PO2. However, in the alveoli, there is high PO2, and therefore oxygen would diffuse in. So that is a diffusion gradient, and this diffusion gradient is maintained because there is good ventilation in the lungs and circulation of blood. So basically what it means is that, well, the air keeps moving in and out, whereas the blood is being pumped continuously, so it's moving, forward. Therefore, the incoming blood, okay, there's always incoming blood with low PO2. And there's always air here that has a higher partial pressure of oxygen. Okay, let's look at the PCO2. So this deoxygenated blood would carry carbon dioxide, right? Not in the red blood cells, but also in the plasma. Now, the alveoli, however, has a low PCO2, and therefore carbon dioxide can diffuse outwards, right, from high PCO2 to low PCO2. So when blood is leaving the lungs, right, back to the heart, it will be oxygenated with more oxygen than before, less CO2. So yeah, this structure here is incredibly important for gas exchange. Okay, to add on to that, I guess I forgot to mention that blood is also stored in the capillaries. Capillaries are very narrow, right? And red blood cells pretty much pass through the capillaries one at a time. And that gives some time for the exchange to occur as well. So yeah. So before I move on, I guess I really need to discuss this one past year question that often comes out, which is this. What is the number of cell surface membranes through which oxygen must pass to get from here to here, right? From inside the alveolus to the red blood cells. Now, it's really important to note that the alveolus, the alveolar wall, is 1 cell thick, and the blood capillary is also 1 cell thick, right? They are both made of squamous epithelium cells. So, yeah, they are both 1 cell thick. And then the next thing to note is, okay, where is the oxygen going? It's obviously going to go into the red blood cells, right? Because oxygen will bind with hemoglobin in red blood cells to form oxyhemoglobin. So it must pass from this cavity through 2 cells, so 1 squamous epithelial cell from the alveolus, 1 squamous epithelium cell from the blood capillary, and then into the red blood cell. So this is the pathway here. Now, how many cell surface membranes though? So let me count with you. If you want, you can pause this video and try and count it yourself first. But this is how it's counted, right? So oxygen must pass through the cell inside and then get out. So that is 2 cell surface membrane already. All right, and then for the squamous epithelial layer of the capillary, it's going to do the same thing, diffuse into that cell and then out of that cell, and then through the blood plasma into the red blood cell, which also has 1 more cell surface membrane. So the answer to this question is 5. 5 cell surface membranes. It has to pass through 5, only 5, in order to get from the alveolus into the red blood cell. This is a very short diffusion distance and it's great for efficient gas exchange. Now, the answer for carbon dioxide is slightly different though. So if they ask you, what is the number of cell surface membrane through which CO2 must pass? Your answer might differ because don't forget that some CO2 is dissolved in blood plasma, so not in the red blood cell, but obviously most of it is from the red blood cell. So the way you count here might differ a little bit, right? The answer may differ because CO2 in blood plasma will only pass through 4 membranes. So in and out of the squamous epithelium of the capillary, then in and out of the squamous epithelium of the alveolar cavity, right? So that is 4 right here. But if you are diffusing from the red blood cells into the alveolar cavity, that'd be 5, just like we saw in oxygen. So the answer to this question is 4 or 5 because of the different ways carbon dioxide can be transported in the blood. So yeah, for O2, for oxygen, it's 5. For CO2, it's 4 or 5. And yes, again, that shows us how short the diffusion distance is and how important it is for rapid gas exchange. And you can see it here in the normal micrograph for the alveoli here, right? It's 1 cell thick again. You can see that it's very thin walls and it's like a network. Now, I just want to show you what happens in COVID-19. Whatever respiratory problems you have, that's kind of parked under acute respiratory distress syndrome or ARDS. That doesn't matter that much. What I want to show you is what happens after inflammation and scarring. So you can imagine the alveolus maybe gets disrupted and then the body tries to fix it. And then, more pathogens are trapped there maybe, so there's inflammation and then it gets hurt again and then it scars again. So repeated inflammation and scarring would cause these alveolar walls to become super thick compared to this. And these are all scar tissue. And this causes the diffusion distance to be very long compared to the normal one. So gas exchange in COVID-19 is definitely not as efficient compared to the normal tissue. Obviously, this is an extreme case after long periods of time, but this is what happens in the lungs of a COVID-19 patient. So yeah, stay safe and take care, guys. Please make sure your lungs are able to function properly. This scarring is not reversible. Anyways, we kind of talked about the trachea, the bronchus, the bronchiole, and the alveoli, and that's kind of that's kind of it. That's all. This is the entire chapter. Now, this is a little summary table showing you what each structure has. So, ciliated epithelium is found in the trachea, bronchus, and bronchiole. Even the bronchiole only has a little bit, it definitely is found there. Hyaline cartilage is found in a in a C-shaped ring in the trachea and found in plates for bronchus. Smooth muscle is found only in the trachea and bronchus, and this allows it to contract and relax and change the diameter of the airway. Whereas the site of gas exchange, which is always a question that people stumble at, is only the alveoli. Only the alveoli. This is where gas exchange occurs between the air and the blood. So yeah, now don't forget you need to know all the structures of these different things as well. This is a summarized version. And yeah, you can refer to this summary slide to study this chapter whenever you want. And yeah, that's it for this chapter. I will see you next video. Bye-bye.